one of our viewers, in watching Quick Tip 201 on how to make grass in oils, said this is a very good segment on the technique for acrylics and oils, but how do you approach it for watercolor? Well, this will be a little different and something for you watercolor folks. I always like to say that watercolor and oil painting have nothing in common, not nearly as much in common as watercolor and pottery do, because in watercolor and in pottery, the control of what happens depends a whole lot on the water. So when we're doing techniques in watercolor, we're, for the most part, approaching it totally different than we would in oil. Now, there are many watercolor techniques and many watercolor approaches, and so you'll find maybe that other watercolor painters might approach this different from the way I'm going to approach it. But what I'm going to do, I'm taking the same photo I used in Quick Tip 201, and I'm going to use the same bunch of grasses here and just show how I would do that in watercolor. And then those of you who work in watercolor might explore this, and those of you who don't work in watercolor might find that maybe you want to give it a try. So first of all, I like to start every watercolor painting wet on wet. So the first thing I would do, before I do that though, I like to pull before I wet the paper, I like to pull the color out onto the palette. And so I'm going to pull, I'm seeing here in these colors, I'm seeing lots of yellow green. And so first of all, I'm going to go in to my color. I have SAP Green. I use mostly the Daniel Smith watercolors. There are a few Winsor Newtons on the palette, but not that many. So I'm going to pull out a good batch of SAP Green that doesn't have much water in it. Now we know that in watercolor we get our lights by adding more water rather than adding white. So I always like to pull out thick batches of color in order to be able to get the darkest darks I need. Now I need something else too. That green is not going to be dark enough. Neither is it going to give me the variation that I'm seeing here. So I'm seeing some cool greens, some blue greens in the shadow portions of the grasses, and for that I'm going to pull out ultramarine blue. So I'll get a good patch. That's not ultramarine blue, is it? I think it is. I think in my watercolor there, this is something else that happens, that the ultramarine blue had another color mixed in with it, but that's okay. I'm just going to pull that out anyway, because the main thing I need it there, need it for, is for the coolness of it and the darkness. So I'll do that. Let's get a palette knife there that's making a little racket. All right, now I see that. Now in watercolor I can get that lighter variation of the yellow with a lighter portion of the SAP Green, but I like to enhance that just a little bit. So I'm going to pull out here. This is the cadmium yellow deep. I'm just going to pull a little bit of that out here, just to give me that ability to make those grasses just a little warmer. Now there are going to be those who are going to ask, why don't you pull out this yellow? Well, I could have pulled out any yellow I have on my palette. That's just the one I happen to choose. All right, now I'm just going to keep this basic. So the first thing I would do after getting the colors out on the palette is then to wet the paper. Now that usually for a larger painting I'll wet the paper by using a spray bottle, but since this is just a quick tip, I'm just going to wet it with a brush. This is a 1-inch watercolor brush. It's everybody always likes to know that, because the watercolor brushes are a whole lot more varied than brushes that we have for oil painting. So this is a cheap Joe Dreamcatcher 1-inch. It's my favorite 1-inch brush. Now I'm wetting that. Now the next thing I watch for is for that wetness to sort of lose its gloss. And this is one reason why watercolor doesn't make a real good material for doing all the quick tips that we do, because it does have a timing factor, and so you have to be aware of so many technical things. But as that is beginning to lose its gloss, I'm seeing that the gloss is relatively even. I'm going to move into the SAP Green. Now, I'm going to give a very light wash, and I'm getting just you can see that I'm adding a little bit of water that's in the brush to that SAP Green. The stroke I'm going to use for this first layer of paint is a sort of a vertical stroke where I've got the brush held at about a 45-degree angle and pushing that kind of as a vertical stroke, and I'll move it in two directions like that, so that kind of overlaps. Now what I'm trying to imitate there, I'm looking for the light that's in that grass, because with watercolor we work from well, it works better to work from light to dark. Now, so I'm going, while it's still wet, throw a little bit of this yellow in there, just a little bit, not much. Now, as the grass moves into the distance, it gets less defined, and it gets a little cooler. So what I'll do there is pull just a little bit of ultramarine blue, and have even more water in the brush, and I'll pull out the excess water, and then I'll begin to work that into the distance, sort of like that. Now I'm just going to use just about this much. I'm not trying to do the whole picture here, just that much. Now I need to watch for the wetness of that, because in watercolor, if we hit if the water that we have in the brush, the paint we have in the brush, is wetter than the paint that's on the paper, it causes what we causes back runs, and those of you who work in watercolor will be really familiar with that. It's something not desirable. So now what I'm going to do, I'm looking at how wet that, or how dry that is. As grass or anything that has texture, as it moves into the distance, it loses more and more of its texture definition. So what I'm going to do here is pull some paint just on the tip of the brush. Have the brush relatively dry, and pull some paint just on the tip of the brush, and put a little bit of that blue in there. I don't want that prominent. Now I'll hold the brush like this, and I'm just going to give it just a sweep across and let the lines that are developed by the brush between those sweeps, let those be the texture or the value variations that I'm seeing as that texture moves into the distance. I'll bring that down a little bit. Still, I'm making sort of a diagonal sweep, not straight across, but sort of a very subtle diagonal sweep as I'm moving across. Now as those things are getting closer, those clumps of grass are getting closer to us, they're getting a little bit more definition. And here too, this is still very damp, and the brush is still damp. I'm going to re-wet the brush, but I'm going to pull the majority of the water out of the brush. I'm just going to use the tip of the brush. I'm moving the tip of the brush into that SAP Green, just a little bit of that ultramarine blue, just a little bit of it. And let's see, taste it right here, be sure that's what I want. Get a little bit more. Okay, now in the distance, what I'll do here is I'll hold the brush at an angle, and just give it a slight push like this. Just a very short push. Now this will go down darker and will dry lighter, so I'm going to give that another short push as it's coming down. I'm going to give it a little bit more, gives it a little bit more of a sweep as it's moving to this. It's okay, another short push. Now I'm letting these little short pushes here represent these little clusters that we're seeing there. So just giving it a push where I touch the brush to the paper and just lift it up is all I need. Now here's the thing about watercolor, as I continue to work, this continues to get drier, and that's a good reason to start in the back and come forward, because that enables whatever's in the back to be a little bit more, blend a little bit more, which is what happens as we look in the distance. Things get more blended. And so now as this is coming closer here, I'm seeing a little bit more distinct color. And so what I'm going to do, that is touch. Yes, that is still damp. But because I'm doing a quick tip and I want to do this in one fell swoop, I'm going to reach back into these two colors, pull the excess water out of the brush, and I'm just going to do something like this, just to sort of darken a little bit the area that I'm in front. Now I will take the tip of the, dry the brush and take the tip of the brush and sort of lift out just a little bit. Don't have to lift out much. Lift out just a little bit. That will interpret those sort of lights we see there. Now let that get a little bit drier. Now I'm ready to go in for the heavy stuff. So I'll reach in for the darker stuff. I'll reach into the dark or the green, and not very much water, just on the tip of the brush. All right, now see in the distance there, there's sort of a clumpy one, so I'm going to just hold the brush down and hold it down and give it a move upward, sort of like that. That sort of does that. And I'm going to reach while that's still damp. I'm going to reach for my round brush, pull major part of the water out, and I'm going to give a slight blend to the bottom portion of that shadow area, that shadow in grass. Now I'm just going to continue that process. Now I'm just using a portion of the brush and allowing the brush to move upward, but I let it move upward at one angle on the back. Now I'm going to kind of vary those angles a little bit, like we see them varied here, and just give a very short push. And now I'll go back with my round brush dampened and just touch the bottom part so that we can see those shapes coming out of the earth there. And then we will go and reload the brush, and this time get the paint just a little bit darker. And I'm going to go ahead and just give that frontal layer a longer push, because we see those grasses in front longer than we see the grasses in the back. So I'll give that a longer push and kind of use this as a guide here as I'm doing that. And so I turn the brush in one way, kind of push it a little bit, and then lift it up and let the bristles of the brush form that kind of grassy texture that we're looking at there. Don't want to overdo. It's better to underdo than to overdo. And then I can dampen the brush. Let's see, what else have we got there? I can dampen the brush if I want to. If I want to lift out some of those lights, I can dampen the brush and just sort of let it sit where I want the lights lifted out, and then give it a little bit of a push like this. Let it sit right there, damp brush, and just give it a little bit of a push, and that can help lift out some of those light bristles that we see in front. Now just to give it a little bit of a final touch, wait just a minute. No, I want to lighten. Now this you can do. People say you can't lift out watercolor. Well, you can if you know how. This seems to me to be too much the same value as it's going across. And so what I can do while it's still damp, I can pull the major part of the water out of the brush and just let the brush sit on those and sort of lift them out. Push them up just a little bit. Don't want to overdo that. Give that a little bit more softness. Touch it right in here. Give it a little bit more softness. Now the only thing left to do, as that gets drier, that's the way watercolor works. As the paper gets drier, then your brush marks are going to get sharper. The edges of the brush marks are going to get sharper. And so as it gets drier here, when it's pretty much dry to touch, and it still feels very wet to me, then I can get a little bit more definition in the grasses. Now I'm going to do a little something here that I may regret, but I'm going to load the brush again right here. See, I've almost used all my green paint, but I'll load the brush again, and this time I'm going to use this kind of stroke where I allow, I need to get a little bit wetter, where I allow the tip of the brush right here to do the actual mark making. And so maybe I see just a little bit. Let's right here. Okay, I see a few of those. Clumps of grass that are a little sharper right there. You see, by doing that, this is still a little wet, so it's not making it as sharp as I want it. And that means that we would need to wait until that dried completely for you to be able to see exactly how sharp. But let me try a little bit right here. So this is maybe a little bit drier. Now see, that is so typical of watercolor. If the paper is the least bit damp, those edges are going to get softer and softer. So you may not see. We'll wait just a moment longer. And that's, if I had a hair dryer, I know, if I had my hair dryer in here, I could give it a little hit with a hair dryer and you could see that. But I don't have the hair dryer here, so I'm going to try, let's try another area over here. I got to be careful, I don't want to put too many darks, don't get it too, I don't get it too busy. Maybe I could do something right here. Let's see if I can. There we go. That will show you a little bit more about what working just with the tip of that brush can give you. Let's give it a little bit more shadow at the bottom there. Gives you just a little bit more of an idea there. Now I've got the hairs of the brush kind of split. Give it a little bit more texture like this. There we go. Now you can see it's a little bit drier down here, and you can see a little bit more of what I'm talking about, when I talk about that sharp edge that you can see. So that pretty much is that's pretty much the method I would use. Now it seems kind of incomplete because you don't have the other stuff around it. But if for example you want to get more variation in the background, you can do, while it's still relatively damp, you can do that same sort of thing where you can get, I see some streak of light showing there, and so I could kind of work the brush a little bit here and get a very soft lift out of light. If I see edges there that are too strong, like I'm seeing right in here, then I can just take the brush while it's still damp and give it just a little bit of, with clean water on the tip of the brush, give it just a little bit of massage there. Same thing right here. You give that just a little bit of massage, and that would take away that streakiness. So that's a brief and very basic method for doing pretty much the same sort of thing as I was doing in Quick Tip 201. So give that a try. Hope you enjoyed this quick tip. If you have questions or a suggestion for a quick tip, leave us a comment right down here in the YouTube comment box. And take a trip over to DianeMinds.com and look at all the things we have there for you, including full-length video tutorials. And while you're there, sign up for our newsletter so you'll always be informed of our latest adventures. Thanks for watching.